Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the 2020 CAST annual meeting, which we're holding virtually this year. I am Kent Chesky and I serve as the Executive Vice President of CAST. It's my pleasure to introduce this morning's program. Last year, in 2019, at the World Food Prize in Des Moines, Iowa, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Borlaug CAST Communication Award. We had a special program we did during that program to help kind of focus the discussion around science communication. What was the current state of it? And, really picking the brains of some of our past Borlaug CAST Communication Award winners to get their ideas, their thoughts, their perspective on what should we be doing or we should be focused on to better enhance our science communications. That program was moderated by Julie Borlaug, and we're very pleased to have Julie back with us today to moderate another round of that same discussion, this time calling upon a different group of Borlaug CAST Communications Award winners. As you're aware, this year we named our 11th Borlaug CAST Communication Award, and you'll get to meet her in just a few minutes. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Borlaug, Vice President of Communications and Public Relations for INARI. Julie also serves on the Crop Life Foundation, which has been the sponsor of the CAST Borlaug BCCA Award for the last several years. We appreciate it all. And another connection, Julie also serves on the CAST Board of Trustees and has been an instrumental part of our organization, in particular the Borlaug CAST Communication Award, which has been kind of one of our flagship awards. And it's been really a great way to connect us with Dr. Borlaug's legacy and the importance of sharing science and communication. So Julie, thank you for being here today, and I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you and welcome to all who are watching. The Borlaug CAST Award is one of my favorites. My grandfather, as everyone knows, was very passionate about the way we communicate to not only government officials and agencies, but to the public and even other scientists. So this award is near and dear to my heart. And today I get to have a panel with some of my favorite awardees and some who have I've had a lot of contact with. So this is such a great honor. I'm going to start moving ahead so we get a lot of time to do Q&As. So I'm going to first introduce Alison Van Edeman, who was a Borlaug CAST laureate in 2014. She is an extension specialist at UC Davis with animal biotechnology and genomics. And she's in the Department of Animal Science. She got her MS and her master's and PhD at UC Davis. She's also won the 2019 Rockefeller Prentice Award. So are you a Rocky Dog, Alison? Is that what we could call you?
If you like, sure.
Yeah, Rocky Dog. So she's won numerous awards, and I can't say enough about her. Not only is she a scientist and a passionate communicator, but she also is a movie star, if you have seen Food Evolution, and also when you were on with the Science Guy, with Rob Fraley.
Intelligence Squared debate. Yeah.
A phenomenal job with that, and everyone, if you haven't seen it, please watch it. So Alison, please introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, Julie, and it's such an honor to be to know you. Your dad was actually, or your grandfather, excuse me, was very influential in my decision to go into agricultural science. You may not know that, but back in the 70s when I was growing up, I was born in the 60s, but there were just horrible famines that kind of really spurred me into going into agricultural science. And I think even today, with a horrifying 9 million people starving to death a year, it amazes me that's not a newsworthy item. And that's like 9 times as many as died of COVID this year. And yet we look at the emphasis that gets. It's such an important thing. And I'm obviously in agricultural extension because I'm very much a believer in taking it to the farmer. And so I was asked to kind of reflect on my experience following the Borlaug Award. And it's been really a roller coaster the last 6 years. It's been super busy in terms of science communication. And there have been some really fun highlights. The Intelligence Squared debate that Julie just alluded to was in December of 2014, where we went to New York City with the foolish aim of convincing a group of urban audience members that actually GMOs are a good thing. And so myself and Rob Fraley were paired up against Margaret Mellon and Chuck Benbrook for an hour and a half in the Kaufman Theatre, and surprisingly we were able to sway that audience, the undecided people for the most, to believe that actually yes, they could be used for good purposes. And I think that was a really satisfying moment. And Food Evolution, the documentary movie that you also spoke of, was really one of the highlights of my scientific career. I think it's been screened throughout the world, and it is available on Hulu if you want to watch it. I've attended about 40 sessions at literally, I think, every continent at this stage, including the FAO in Rome, which was really interesting. And I was really proud recently, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who narrates the movie, wrote, "Food Evolution is a beacon of rationality, an island amidst an ocean of documentaries that confuse objective truths with wishful thinking. It's an honest yet stark look at the role science literacy needs to play in decisions that affect our daily lives and our future." And if that's not a message for the times, I'm not sure what it could be. I've done, I think, about 400 presentations to audiences around the world since receiving this. And most recently, I think I did the National Academy of Sciences Entertainment Academy speed dating, where you have 7 minutes to explain genetically modified organisms, which was really interesting. There you're talking to basically film writers to try to get them to incorporate science correctly into their documentaries so that we don't have GMO, OMG, or some of the other egregious scientific errors you see around entertainment and this particular topic. And my research has had a lot of publicity. Admittedly, I work in animal agriculture and GMOs, so right off the bat, I've probably already got that going on. But we recently did a story that was featured on Nova on CRISPR gene edited reality check that featured our genome knocked in bull. And so that's all the really positive stuff, and it's really been a tremendous experience, and I'm very honored to have received the award. But we still have this problem in that we still have the majority of the general public thinking that GMO foods are unsafe, and the majority of scientists thinking that's not the case. In fact, there's about more than a 51 point gap between where science is on the safety of GMOs and where the general public is. And that's greater gap than any politicized scientific topic, including vaccines, evolution, and climate change. It's just become an established fact that GMO foods are unsafe. It's not even discussed anymore, despite the consensus of every major scientific society in the world. And what concerns me is the same people that led the anti-GMO movement have now kind of morphed and matured into adulthood, leading the anti-vaccine movement, which is particularly concerning at the current time. And in fact, some of the COVID conspiracy theories. And I think it's interesting that even though the majority of scientists think GMO foods are safe, there's still about 12% of AAAS scientists that did not agree with that statement that GMO foods are safe. And this is something that I think is kind of unique to the agricultural GM debate, and that is everyone has an opinion about food production, including scientists, with no training or experience in agriculture, other than as a consumer or a chef or a journalist, yet they're very confident in their opinion about the best way to produce food. It's kind of the classic Dunning-Kruger effect. And there are now so many urban legends around GMOs and agriculture in general that scientific communicators in this field face a really uphill battle, because you're starting from a place that most people don't believe is true. And it was kind of interesting to me, the one location where Food Evolution had a hostile reception was actually on my own sister campus at the University of California in Berkeley. And that was from scientists that aren't necessarily in the area, but have a very definite opinion about GMOs. And I think this is a real problem for agricultural production more generally. And that despite Extension's historic role of taking it to the farmer, as was advocated by Borlaug, I think we may have to think about taking it to the public, because we're facing this well-funded and unrelenting multi-million-dollar disinformation industry who monetize fear and fairy tales around agricultural sustainability, GMOs, animal agriculture, agroecology, etc., etc. And I guess I'd just like to finish with a quote from Norman Borlaug in Cast issue paper number 1, where he said, and I quote, "Several extreme environmentalists posing as new messiahs, founding a new religion, would lead the world into an environmental utopia immediately. They advocate policy changes and legislation that may in the end be detrimental to agriculture, our food production potential, and to society in general. These new messiahs have all too often only used the data which support their theories about ecological doom while ignoring much other experimental data which do not support their views. They often widely denounce all who disagree with them, and I am fearful about the long-time effect of such a pseudo-scientific approach." Very important words for our time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. That was wonderful. And we're so glad you're so busy, and so please keep it up. Next on to Kevin Folta, who I am glad is just here today after all Kevin has been through.
He's glad to be here too.
Kevin it's from the University of Florida. And I have to say, from the knowledge I have, Kevin has been the most beat up person in the whole debate on GMOs on social media. I'm just going to say on social media, Kevin, I know it's been far worse. And there was one day on Twitter, and this was back in like 2016, where you had put, you were signing off, you were done. And I sent something like, "Please don't, stay engaged. We need you." So Kevin, without further ado, please tell us about yourself and what you've been up to.
Well, that's a really good place to start. Thank you very much, Julie. Yeah, like Alison, I think that my journey really was also propelled by your grandfather, not just in understanding what he contributed, but also learning about him as a person. And from his humble beginnings to his tenacity, but at the same time his humility. And those have been things I've tried to incorporate into my own approach to science communication. And part of that humility is sometimes backing out, and there have been times when it's been ugly. But let's start with the good stuff. The CAST recognition really was important. It was an absolute blessing in that it gave a level of validation that what you were doing and being criticized for tremendously, not just from the field as a whole, or, from activists and the general public, who, like Alison said, you're starting in a place where they think you're wrong, but also other colleagues and faculty, other science communicators, folks saying, we don't like that we don't think this is a good thing for you to be doing. You're a good scientist. You're a great department chair. Why are you putting your head into this noose here? And so for me, I was catching it from all sides. But the mission is so important. And I think the idea of having sustainable technologies available to more people and increasing their reach and ensuring farmer choice to ensure food security here and abroad are such important missions. And I look across my university and other universities like Jayson's or Alison's. There's so much beautiful work that is happening, and the food security questions are being answered. But the technology that we can create and the innovation that we have, that seems to almost be endless, has this resistance before it hits the field. And that resistance is our willingness to communicate what it is to the people that need to understand it. And so the way that things have shifted for me personally in my attack to this problem have been many because of the resistance. But one of the most important things that I learned, and this was shortly after the Borlaug recognition, was it wasn't just about science literacy. It wasn't just about sharing information, but this was all an exercise in building trust. And we had to dial it down as scientists and quit coming with the avalanche of information and start learning about how people make decisions. How does the human mind process information? And it became less reading scientific articles about genetically engineered corn and the newest technology. It was more about understanding psychology, learning about how people change their mind through argument and persuasion, understanding hostage negotiation. One of the best books I ever read about science communication was actually about how to get a hostage out of a building. And all of those same ideas really do fit. The big focus has been a shift then to really just more about trust building and understanding how we motivate others to open a pipeline where scientific information can flow. And in that regard, it's been more stepping away from the public and public education, which we still do and still have those opportunities, but much more of a focus on training others in those basic aspects of trust building. Because whether we're talking about climate, COVID, vaccination, all the current issues, we have to come to the public from a position of trust. And so that's been the fun part about this. Students are excited about science communication, and graduate students see it as a great route to build their own portfolios and maybe distinguish themselves from other scientists. And I agree 1,000%. But we're not going to do it with filling a deficit of knowledge. We're going to do it with building trust and teaching them, how do you change somebody's mind? And so science communication for me has become training others in the psychology of trust building. And I think that is kind of deputizing the next generation of science communicators that will be more effective in what they do. Then on top of that, we give them something to share. At the time, I was on episode 22 of the podcast back during 2015 when I was recognized with the award. And now we're up to 270 some episodes, 1.4 million downloads. So that's been a real positive, and giving that information from this weekly presentation of how technology can be helpful for people and a planet. So all of this has been really good. And I think the idea for those of us who are trying to be leaders in science communication is to be investing in the training of the next generation of communicators, and that the mass action of that group doing it correctly will be much more effective than me stepping into Twitter and saying, here's the way to think about it. So that's how things have changed over 5 years, and very glad to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was excellent. Jayson, so excited to have you here today. Jayson is from Purdue University, and he is from I'd say ag eco, but agricultural economics. And by the way, the background of all of our scientists today are so great because everyone works on a different sector within ag, and that's what's so important about coming together to communicate. But Jayson, I still have pictures of your slides from the World Food Prize 3 years ago now that were so great and showed voting coalitions and how certain things vote this way in states and then others. So please tell us what you've been up to, how Purdue has been, because you had just moved to Purdue. And Jayson, welcome.
Thanks, Julie. It's an honor to be here today, and it was and remains to be an honor to win this award. You know, when you see the people who have won this in the past, you know, including Alison and Kevin, and even people who have come afterwards, like Alexa, it's hard to imagine yourself a part of that same group. So, it's been a real honor. You know, it hasn't been that long since I've received the award. So maybe just make a few broad comments about how I got into this space of, you know, more public communication. You know, I've spent most of my career doing academic research on consumer demand issues, food demand, a lot of it sort of methodological. How do we go about studying what consumers will do when we know they lie to us on surveys? Yet we still want to learn about new technologies that maybe aren't yet in the marketplace. But, you know, having done a lot of that work with consumers, often involving focus group kind of work where you're talking to people face to face, you know, it became quite clear people had a lot of misperceptions about food and agriculture. which is really frustrating from somebody like myself that came from a very rural area, worked on farms growing up, has a degree in food science, even though I'm an economist now. And so I just really felt there was a real need to communicate more broadly about food and agriculture, in particular, the science and technology and what it can do on the positive side. And so, that led to an effort to try to write a popular book, which was a 3 or 4 year journey I can talk about earlier on. I probably made a more aggressive case than I would normally want to make, but that's sort of what it took to get something in the mainstream consciousness. But I do think I heard, Kevin mentioned earlier a couple of things I think that really rang home and true to me, which were twofold. One, I think over the years, what I've come to really believe is that trust is really important. I think probably the thing that has bothered me the most isn't that people disagree with us sometimes on the merits of this technology or that, but I think there's sort of been an effort to cause a degradation of trust in both science and the food system. And that's, I think, been frustrating. And I think trying to rebuild that and have healthy conversations has been another. So the book that more recent book that came out a couple of years ago really was born out of that thought. How can I tell a story that's much more positive and try to reinstill some trust while doing something that Kevin mentioned before, just being amazed at what our colleagues do at some of the land grant universities. We just down the hall sometimes, across the street, doing really incredible, amazing stuff that I think most people just don't really have any clue about. And so that was really awesome to have an opportunity to try to explain that to folks. I think what this award does is it elevates one's platform to be able to communicate and tell those stories. And I think that's really important. One of the things it does, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit as we get into broader conversation, is it increases, exponentially the number of opportunities one has to talk to groups that are like-minded. I think one of the challenges for us going forward is how do we increase the opportunities to talk to folks that aren't in our tribe? That's a harder thing to do. At least for somebody like me, I've tried to publish editorials in major media outlets to reach some of those, but sometimes you have to do that in ways that you wouldn't find ideal, or pick things that you think will be particularly interesting to an editorial board. I think that's a real challenge for us going forward. I think one of the things that this award does, though, is it enables one to have an opportunity to have that broader conversation with the general public. So I felt really fortunate to have that opportunity. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you, Jayson. And we are on to this year's Borlaug Cast awardee, and that is Alexa Lamm, and she is from the University of Georgia, and she is in science communications and looks at the social side of the social science side of how we communicate. So Alexa, welcome, and please give us your thoughts since you are our newest member.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate that. First and foremost, I feel unbelievably blessed to be here and a little intimidated after hearing all of our previous award winners and the amazing successes they've had in their careers. It was thrilling to win this award this year. And yeah, I just feel very honored by it. In terms of reflecting on my experience, it's been an exciting year for me despite everything that's happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. As Jayson mentioned, the opportunities to speak to groups has just been overwhelming. I probably speak with 3 or 4 information officers from different commodity groups, or podcast developers for different organizations. I've spoken to the AAAS fellows. I'm going to be doing a podcast for the Produce Marketing Association here this next week. So the opportunities are just abounding because of this award. And so I really would like to thank CAST for that and for this opportunity to be at the forefront of science communication and spreading the message of the importance of communicating effectively to ensure that all of our publics, the American public, the international public, but also decision makers, politicians, and other scientists have an opportunity to understand agricultural science. And that we're communicating that most effectively. I agree with several of the statements that Kevin made about feeling like my role is helping educate future science communicators. My graduate students and the undergraduate students that I work with all the time are very excited about this space. Obviously, I teach science communication courses at the University of Georgia, so it's an area of specialty for me. But even more so, as we move into this new social media space where that's where everyone is getting their information, they want to know how to do it most effectively. And that is grounded in psychological as well as sociological theory. So it's been a really exciting time to be the CAST award winner because things are changing so rapidly in this space. So I want to thank all of you for that opportunity and everything that's come from that. In terms of my current thoughts on the state of science communication in food and ag, I think the way people communicate has just changed dramatically in the last 10, 5, 2 years, and especially the last 6 months. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing more and more reliance in online sources, Zoom meetings like this one. People are going to the web for information more than ever before. I mean, it was there, it was constantly a presence before, but this is a change that has just reached a tipping point, and I don't think there's any going back from that. One of the things we know from psychological theory is that we put on blinders to process information. We have to. We're bombarded with information all the time. And so we selectively look at information and scientific information, especially, and when I say we, I mean anyone in society. But social media allows for an increased use of echo chambers, being able to look at information that only supports what you believe to make you feel better about yourself. And in fact, all of the new algorithms that are being developed daily and weekly on these different only support those echo chambers and creates a very difficult space when we're trying to reach people who don't necessarily agree with us. Like Jayson was saying, we need to reach those people that are not already in the scientific community wanting that information. So how do we get to those people? We need to think about how we use algorithms to our advantage, how we speak in the social media space, so that those people who are already down those paths even get our information or get exposed to our information. I think that is a big, big challenge we're going to face as a scientific community, and it's only going to get worse moving forward. I will say though that I think the #1 challenge that we're going to face now and well into the future is the democratization of information dissemination. And we've seen that because there are a lot of influencers out there sharing pseudo information or fake news that have built trust and relationships in online spaces, which are more important now than ever. And Kevin talked about that a lot of what he does is trust building. And I think that that's something that as scientists and as a scientific community, we don't spend a whole lot of time on, and we need to. Communities are being defined differently online than ever before. It's not the people you're around all the time. You can connect with anyone at any time and build community. And sense of identity is shifting and changing. So personal identity, who you see yourself as, who you connect to, has shifted and changed, and that's altered communities online and the way people share information. So these influencers that are in this social media space are having more and more impact because they define and direct a lot of those communities and conversations. So many single individuals, that have hundreds of thousands of followers, if not millions of followers, are having more influence on people and the food system than the entire scientific community. And so that's a big, big challenge for us. So I think the question is how do scientists become a trusted source or an influencer when it comes to people obtaining information about agriculture, about agricultural advancement? And just like Alison feeding, it freaks me out, the 9 million people that go hungry every day. How do we get that information out there? So I, like Kevin, believe that focusing on building relationships is the most important thing that we can do, and being proactive about information dissemination, which is something that CAST engages in. So again, very honored to be a part of that. I think one of the things we can do as a scientific community looking forward is engage in more storytelling. People make decisions based on emotional response, not on logical response. We know that from psychological theory. And so if we can engage in more storytelling and creating space where scientists and agriculturalists are a part of community and talking their stories and making themselves into real people and making themselves vulnerable as a person will really help, rather than continuing to put out facts and figures, which we now know after a lot of testing is not the best way for us to be communicating science. So I think if we can figure this out, if we can figure out how to connect emotionally, how to build relationships with specific audiences that influence the food system, we can gain support for agricultural development. Again, thrilled to be here today. Thank you for having me. I'm amazed by the people I'm on this panel with, so thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Alexa. And now we're going to go to our Q&A session. So please, audience, on the Zoom group chat, please type in questions and I will call out your name. And funny enough, Alexa, I just want to let you know, every time I say your name, the Alexa in the other room starts talking to me. So
I understand there's a reason we do not have an echo in my house. I think my parents or my kids would talk to it all the time. So yeah.
So we have a question from David Baltonsberger, and I'm going to call him out first because he's an Aggie and I'm an Aggie. So his question for the panel is, how do you build trust when groups are willing to lie and act on other things in their discussions? And I always say we have a new strain of fact-resistant humans. So how do you build trust with these individuals from outside our audiences that are okay with GMO, are okay with innovation and technology? And Alexa, I see you first. So would you like to start?
Sure. I mean, this is a big challenge for us because as a scientific community, we need to be ethical and moral, and we need to really shy away from getting into hard debates with individuals that are trying to entice us to do that. But we have to remember that we're human too, right? So we have emotional reaction as well when we're attacked, when our science is attacked, and we know that it's blatantly untrue information, it's misinformation, it's pseudo information, or it's just plain fake news, which we're seeing more and more of. So I think us backing away and not engaging in those conversations, but having the truth present is really important. And so I think avoiding being combatant in those places actually places us on the moral high ground.
Would anyone else? Alison, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, that's a hard one. You know, I think there are people that are deliberately spreading misinformation, which is a little bit different to people not knowing that they're spreading misinformation. And I guess, actually, I was listening to one of Kevin's podcasts last week, and he kind of distinguished between are you intentionally spreading that, or do you not know that that's not true? And the latter case, I think, is an opportunity to inform. The former case is where I have a hard time because you are monetizing fear for your own personal gain. And that's just unethical. And I don't really, and you're not going to change that person's behavior because their income depends upon it. And so I think that they're the more difficult ones, and exposing that, I believe, is something that's really important. So if people believe that they're spreading misinformation for the good of the public, which often some of the environmental groups get kind of an aura that they're trying to protect the public, when in fact they're a business model just the same as other businesses. And if they're intentionally spreading misinformation, then that's propaganda. And I think we do need to call it out. I don't think we'd walk away from that. But knowing the difference, I think, is the hard part, because often you don't really know who you're dealing with, especially on social media. It's some random Joe Blow. So who is this person? And so I think that we tend to be more timid about engaging in that regard on social media. And that's, I think, one of the disadvantages of academia is, to some extent, is that we really can't say outrageous statements, or at least where our professional code constrains us from saying outrageous statements. And people that get a lot of followers are those that make outrageous statements. And so you get 1 million followers not because you're, spreading scientific truths. And so how do we compete when the norms of our institutions are that we don't go insane on social media or do something very dramatic? I think that, and if you look at the followings of like scientists versus, I don't know, actors or politicians or whatever. I mean, it's like, oh, I've got 2,000 followers or something. It's like, it's almost, cringeworthy, because that's not a very big influence.
All right. Well, thank you, audience, for all the questions. And please keep them coming. And I think my video has completely frozen, so I'm just going to talk. Leland, you asked a question. I'm going to send this to Kevin. You asked about in the 1970s, my grandfather, Norman Borlaug, attacked environmentalists like Rachel Carson, and he defended the use of agricultural chemicals and other chemicals that are now serious and have caused harm to the natural environment and human health and animal health. Could you address how you handle that type of an attack, or that in fact my grandfather did do that, and what might happen in the future?
Well, this is relatively simple because you have to put yourself in the context of the time, which is something we're not really good at these days. Back at the time, the question was that your grandfather addressed was starving people, and with huge famines that were happening all over the world, and the ability to use modern technologies, be they genetic or chemical with respect to fertilizer or crop protection, these were the best tools at the time. And while we were still learning to use them, there was a learning curve. And we found that a lot of those things eventually went away. But the values were to save human lives and to put humans first and to put food security first. We eventually learned that there were some things that we had to do differently, and we did. So the system works. So to me, I agree with Rachel Carson that the best thing we could have is genetic resistance to disease and genetic crop protection. And that's completely consistent with the ideas of biotechnology. So I think that when in this particular question, you're talking about a discussion that was happening in the 1970s. And we see a very different landscape today with lower toxicity inputs. The chemistries are very different, used very differently. The genetics make them less necessary to be used. So the progress really justifies that we've come a long way.
Thank you for that. Jayson, I'm going to ask this question, and please, our other panelists chime in. So in academia, and Felicia, I love this question. Can you address that there's a lack of incentive in academia to participate in science communication, even if it's not in your field? I see Jayson smiling right now. How do we change this? How do we get this a part of things that professors and researchers need to do? So Jayson, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, we had a little discussion on our practice call for this that maybe is relevant here. I think, unfortunately, it's the case at some universities that it's not only not incentivized, but actively discouraged. Because if you can end up on, the front page of a paper, or somebody's going to say something mean about you in the state's, paper, for a lot of administrators, that's a risk. And a lot of administrators have the attitude of, risk avoidance. But I think you have to be, have to adopt a slightly different mindset. Julie, you asked me this question. I never did answer it. How's the move to Purdue been? And I would say, in that sense, awesome. So I'll brag on my current employer, but they embrace scientists who want to engage the public, and it's a part of the culture here. I get notes from my president, from my dean when I appear in major media outlets. Congratulating me or whatever else. Sometimes if they don't like what I have to say, they might say that too. But the general culture is one in which they see it as a part of our mission to engage that general public. So at least here at Purdue, yes, we have extension, but we have a broader term that we call, outreach and engagement, that I think there's an expectation that everybody is involved in that sort of activity. So I think it's a cultural phenomenon that I think that at least at Purdue is something that we tend to value pretty well, and partly maybe because it's thing that gets incorporated into our promotion process and part of the discussion. But yes, at the end of the day, if you're a young assistant professor, how do you get promoted? Well, honestly, if somebody asked me that advice, I'd say hold off on too much engagement until you get that promotion. And that's just, unfortunately, I think the realities of a lot of our, the world in which we're living in.
Well, Alison, you've been quite a movie star. So how has your university helped you?
So my university is a big university. So UC Davis is, for the most part, been supportive. There has been some negative fallout from being active in this area in terms of the infamous Freedom of Information Act requests. And that's a very, very expensive undertaking for the university. And I think there were 10 scientists at Davis that got it. And it was for years of email, and going through all of that is a pain. And I understand the university's sensitivity about, could you please stop poking the bear because it's costing us money. But at the same time, they've always defended the ability to do that. I guess where I find other campuses have been not very supportive. Berkeley and UCSF have, in fact, hosted my FOIA'd emails in this documents archive that kind of suggests that I'm like a tobacco scientist, which I just find kind of incomprehensible that one of our sister campuses would help an activist group that is spreading misinformation around biotechnology and actually give them credibility. And so I'd say it's a little bit spotty in that regard. So Davis has been great, but the more general campus, I think, does not like to wade into these political areas, especially biotechnology it kind of goes against the lefty leaning kind of sentiments of many academics. And so if I was a climate change scientist, I think I'd get more support. Or if I don't know, I saved organic kittens or something. But working in animal ag and biotech, I think it's just it's a little bit politically incorrect areas, and so there's just less obvious support for doing a public outreach in this area.
Thank you, Alison. And Kevin, I'm coming to you for this because I know Florida and your department and your vice chancellor have been great. And I know you love Freedom of Information Act. So give us some background.
Well, certainly historically, they were very supportive of what was happening because they saw it not just as an injustice against science. It was a faculty member that was really being assaulted from the outside by these FOIA requests, by the smears from University of California, San Francisco. My online reputation, it pretty much is trashed in a Google search because of that stuff. And the university was always very supportive. But last year, they lost their appetite for that. Endless FOIA requests, some that were really onerous, going back to 2013 with all travel records and receipts, things like this, that would take my entire Mondays for weeks. These were requests that they eventually told me, sat me down and said, no more. Cancel your talks for next year, which I had tons on the calendar. Your podcast is over, which now I have to do as outside employment. I am not allowed to do it as part of my university function. They basically said, you're done. And they gave me a teaching appointment, and now I hang out in my office. I don't travel and talk about science as much. But that's why my roles have changed. It's switched from being a university level science communication person to someone who's just working on training the next generation of communicators.
Well, thank you. That did not end as positively as I wanted it, Kevin, too, but thank you. There are a lot of questions that are talking about risk of media appearances and how you engage non-agricultural scientists who buy into urban legends. So can anyone talk about, Alexa, can you talk about how you would get this type of group within the academic community to be more supportive of the work of biotechnology and the work that all of you are speaking to?
Sure, I'd be happy to. In fact, I spend a third of my communicating ag and environmental science class talking to my students about how we communicate with other scientists, because this is so important. We can't just think about political leaders and the public, but we need to be able to communicate within a scientific community so that we're all speaking from the same place. I think one of our biggest challenges is that there is still a perception that agriculture and the environment are at odds with one another. And we need to be very clear in sharing the message that these two are synchronous, that we can only have high agricultural production if we have a sustainable environment, and that that's very important to agricultural scientists. I think that we often leave that part out of the conversation, and it puts people kind of on this environmental versus agriculture slant. And so I think that that's one of the things that we face as agricultural scientists and communicating agricultural science. So I think that could really help. The other thing we do is, when we're talking to other scientists, we tend to lean more on our typical jargon, our acronyms, our higher level academic words than we do when we're talking with public audiences. But the reality is that every single field has its different set of jargon. And so when we reduce that, we reduce some of the noise that keeps people from understanding one another. So I think that we can communicate more effectively together. Most of the work that I do is not with other faculty in my department. Of course, I collaborate with them, but most of my collaborations are with scientists like Alison, like Kevin, like Jayson, that are doing work in other fields. And I work on how do we most effectively communicate the science that they are developing, that they are creating, and the technologies that are coming out most effectively across groups. So I see faculty within my own college, when we have faculty that are focused on environmental issues and agricultural production issues, at odds with one another. I think we need to focus on really positive space to have conflict, because I don't think conflict is a bad thing. I think conflict is a good thing if we can come to resolution and listen to one another. But we need to create space for scientists to have those conversations that aren't in the public sphere, because a lot of what's happening here is that those conversations are happening in a very social space. So I think the scientific community needs to think about creating some forums and spaces for scientists to come together and have these conversations in a really well-rounded space where all sides can be heard from a logical perspective while reducing jargon.
If I might jump in on that real briefly, I think a lot of universities and associations do media training and communication, which is really good to do. But I'd say there's one aspect of that sometimes I don't like, which is it kind of trains you to be a politician. No matter what question you get asked, you turn it back to whatever your talking points are. I'm not a politician. So, I mean, my number one advice to people is be a normal person. I think it's one reason Alison gets on all these TV shows. She's a wonderful, normal person who can also talk about science. And she doesn't talk about it like a politician. You probably have talking points, Alison, but, you're just being yourself. And I think that's what really makes you so effective. And so that's my encouragement to others is yeah, you're a scientist, but just be a normal person. and I have literally done thousands of interviews with media, and yes, there's risk, but I'd say 99.9% of those have been positive experiences. They very rarely, and I know there's probably some exceptions that folks on this very meeting can allude to, but generally most media wants to cover the story in a fair way and can be, treat fairly. So I think the perception of risk, yes, it's real, but that's not the norm in my general experience.
Thank you, Jayson. I'm going to do two more questions. One was an earlier question that Jim Prince put up, and it was, what Sputnik type event? I call it myself like a shoot to the moon type event could we do that would bring the general public along to understand and appreciate agriculture and biotechnology and all that it encompasses? So who would like to go first? Okay, you know,
I could jump. No, go ahead. Whoever wants to go first. I think that we're at a precipice with respect to gene editing. And Alison certainly knows the pains of having a technology not being as accepted and lauded as it should be. We're here now 2 weeks after the Nobel Prize went to this technology. We have a woman who's alive today without sickle cell anemia because her genes have been edited, or the cells at least in her bone marrow. There are children alive today who have, because of gene editing, have overcome leukemia. We need to be getting the public excited about the potential of this technology and the fact that it is genetic engineering. Start with those examples that resonate with all of our values. Children being healthy, animals being healthier, swine that don't suffer from viral diseases. These are things that we can do. And I think that kind of a Sputnik moment would be launching a public forum to understand the potential of what we have in front of us.
I think those things have to be stated, you know, in terms of what people want. I don't think people care about the tools or techniques as much. You know, we had a huge goal. You mentioned Sputnik. We wanted to go to the moon. I don't know that people cared about the exact details of the science on board in terms of how it got there. They cared about the outcomes. So I think, you know, when I think about those kind of big ideas, I'm thinking about what are the things people care about that we can deliver. Can we substantially reduce carbon emissions? Can we, do, I hesitate to say this, but, people have concerns about the things you just mentioned, Julie, the chemical use in agriculture, however you want to phrase that. What can we do to alleviate people's concerns about the safety of their food in some meaningful, big way? I think that's sort of the way I think about it, even though it's not I don't have a great 10-second, pitch for you on what that moonshot actually is.
Alexa, do you have any ideas what the moonshot could be?
Oh man, this one is, it's tough, but it's exciting too, because if we could figure it out, it could have such a huge impact. I think, and maybe it's near and dear to my heart because I have 3 school-age children, but I struggle thinking about the fact that there are kids in the United States that don't even live that far from me in the urban Atlanta area that do not get 3 healthy meals a day, especially during COVID when schools are closed. And if there would be a way that we could figure out as an agricultural society to distribute food so every child in the United States has access to healthy food 3 times a day, and we could showcase that, man, that'd be a Sputnik moment for me.
Perfect. I am going to ask the last question, and this is going to be, and my video is still frozen, so technology does not work at my house, but this is going to be for all the panelists, and it's your advice that you could give to CAST on what they could be focusing on that would help in communicating and help further support what you all have been able to do. So Alison, we'll start with you.
Well, I think we're definitely seeing a switch to how people get their information. And I think Alexa alluded to this in her presentation. And academia has been really slow to jump on that train. And more generally, I think the scientific societies, including CAST, have relied on, the type of documents that you distribute, the CAST commentaries and those types of things. But I think you need to look at what's being successful in getting people's attention on the internet in different forms. And so I think it probably requires thinking a little differently in terms of how you distribute that information. I guess I would look to, well, what is successful in this current medium, and certainly even just switching to this type of a format that we're doing here this morning. We wouldn't have guessed a year ago, I think, that we would be doing this on a Zoom call, right? And so there has been, I've been to some conferences in this era where instead of the normal, 200 participants, they've got 500 participants from around the globe. And I think that opens up some new opportunities that we didn't have before everybody was pretty much forced to go to a different communication style. So I guess that would be an opportunity that I see that maybe COVID has delivered to CAST.
Kevin, we're going to go to you next.
Generation of media outside of the echo chamber. How do you find out where people are consuming their media relative to food and farming? And how do we put more exciting and appealing media there in those spaces? That's the easy solution.
Jayson, you are next.
This is the problem going after Alison and Kevin. They took the two ideas I already had. But yeah, so I think the form of communication is really important. More infographics, more ways of communicating that are easily digestible to the public, I think is important. And what Kevin mentioned too, I think I already said this earlier, but we got to figure out ways to talk to people beyond our tribe. And some of that might involve expanding the stakeholder groups who are part of this association. And that's uncomfortable sometimes because they might have slightly different interests, but I think that's the key, is finding other associations where we might not overlap on every issue, that we find some common ground that you can make some headway, because that's the only way you're really going to impact these conversations, talking about people that are different than inside the echo chamber.
And Alexa.
I agree with everything else that's been said. So just to go on top of that, I'm gonna say video. We need to get more video out there in addition to the white papers, the commentaries, even these panels online. 80% of information consumed online right now is in video format, and most of that is less than a minute in length. So we need to be present, we need to be short, we need to be succinct, and we need to be on the channels where people are getting their information. The second thing I would say is we need to empower our young generation to do this and to help us do this, because I'm guessing, I'm going to make an assumption, I'm the youngest person on the panel, and I am outdated in the way that I think about social media. I empower my grad students, my undergrads, to do all of the social media for our college, for our research and extension, because they're way better at it than I am. And it has enhanced our presence immensely. And so I think we need to find youth that are passionate about agricultural science and communicating about it, and get them to help us do it well. And so that would be my second piece of advice.
Great, well, thank you all so much. Please, everyone, read the questions, and if you want to get in contact with any of the panelists, I know they would welcome the opportunity to talk to you. So would the CAST staff members, as well as me. Alison, you have a cow problem in your background, according to Lowell, and so you need to change that.
Yeah, apparently I have highlighted one particular breed, and I just would like to defend. This is a ranch of a friend of mine, so you're going to have to talk to him about it. It was not my choice as to which breed he keeps on his ranch.
Well, great. Well, I am so grateful that everyone attended this, and I'm going to send this back to the CAST staff to end today. Thank you.
Julie, thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists today. Great discussion, a lot of great ideas. We've had a lot of great feedback from folks that listened to this. And again, I think